let me tell you, I really believe in this. You know, I've had more than 40 years of experience in the energy business. And I think I have a grandchild too, by the way. And so very tempting to go and retire, and which of course, I'd love to be with my grandchild. But it's also such an exciting time for energy. That's why it's the best time for energy, because in my lifetime, it has never been so innovative, such an important problem to solve for nation security, for our well-being, for our prosperity, and also is the most difficult it's ever been in the lifetime of definitely my lifetime, but also in the lifetime of electricity as we know it. And it's had a very long history, as you probably well know. Edison, Tesla are named, Westinghouse. These are all names from the, it sounds like the hoary past, but they're the ones who kind of laid the groundwork and have become such an essential part of our well-being. You know, when electricity goes off, there's two things that you talk about. Why did it go off? Because you want to know. And B, when's it going to come back in? So those two questions are framed in a terms called reliability and resilience. You'll see this in the literature. Reliability means how often does the light stay on? And you'll be amazed, you know, although people complain about the grid in the United States, it is one of the best in the world. You know, given the complexity, the number of users and everything else. So we have to be very thankful that we have very strong foundations as we build the grid. But I'm not kidding you, but the changes are coming. Changes are coming really fast. And if you're not careful, if you're not prepared for the future, you know, we may not be used to having high reliability. Resilience is the other side. You know, you want to know, okay, I know there's a Super Sandy storm, you know, that you can't help. Mother Nature has its own course. You had a Halloween storm 2 or 3 years ago here, and that was pretty devastating too. So we accept that. These are nature's way of saying, hey, listen, you know, don't take everything for granted. But you want to know when's it going to come back up, you know? People can tolerate during the super sick, you know, weather event, you know, something being off for maybe 3 hours, 6 hours, but it gets really irritating because you cannot do many things. You know, one of the biggest things is you cannot charge your phone. It becomes an integral part of our lives. And speaking of the phone, we pay much more for the phone than we do for the electricity bill. How many of you have seen your electric bill? All right. How many of you really examine it to figure out? There we go. There's a real geeks here. So I think the good part of the story is that still, as part of our disposable income in the United States, electricity is pretty cheap. But I don't want to kid you. I think electricity is almost like a human right, civil right. You have to see it serving the entire population, not just the ones who can afford it. Oh, there are quite a number of them, but there are also low-income folks. And this is where electricity plays such a pivotal role. That's why pricing of electricity, you know, cannot take wild fluctuations, you know, because of the impact it can have on the kind of the less privileged lot. So I'm going to kind of tackle these issues, and I'll end up with a YouTube video which shows the 10 most exciting things to look forward to in the energy, and then open it up for questions. So I said this is the best time, and you can ask me why. And I kind of laid this 3 series here. It is the most innovative it's ever been, definitely in my career, and definitely as you go forward. And you're seeing this innovation of the types of generation you can have. You have photovoltaic, you have small photovoltaics which are plug and play, sometimes come with batteries. You have photovoltaic now that is almost in parity with grid electricity. So what I mean is conventional ways of generating electricity. Typically, it's like 3-4 cents a kilowatt hour. You know, and solar electricity, as far as the DOE goes, you know, they're shooting for, I think, 6 cents a kilowatt hour by 2020. And we're pretty close to that magical figure. There's wind, there's tidal motion that can be used for generating electricity, and renewables, you know, biomass, and so on. And so as we come into a world which is much more challenged by carbon issues, carbon dioxide, the amount of man-made carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, these are all real things, you know, the impact you can have, time span, and so on. We can argue. But as far as what we've been doing before, we need to change some of our habits. And I think this, the generation that I'm seeing in front of me, you know, you've got these exciting things to look forward to. So innovation is one of the keys. And by the way, when I say innovation, it's not just technology. You know, it's not the Googles and the Apples jumping into new renewable technologies. It's also the business models. You know, we have somewhat of an archaic model. Should we retool this for the 21st century? You know, how does one make, yeah, these APRODs are supposed to be profitable. Now, no utility is going to generate electricity. We're going to go down the tubes. They have to make a profit. You know, but that profit margin is being cut thinner and thinner because of conventional ways of generating electricity. Of course, there's a great way of doing it, but now, you know, you need to have a reboot. So you have innovation in all those areas. It's important. You know, I can't stress enough what a significant part of our nation's infrastructure and the security of that is so vital to our survival. If somebody were to hack the grid, and you know, you have all these horrible scenarios, you know, it could cripple us. And there's so many ways of doing this. You know, you read about this in the newspaper all the time. You know, once upon a time, something like EMP. How many of you heard of that? Okay. Electromagnetic pulse. Electromagnetic pulse. So, you know, that could have been a serious issue from superpowers, you know, like the Soviet Union or something like that. But now, you know, any small country can manage something like that. And not that they can do it, or we don't have the defense to take care of it, but it's just a threat level that keeps your eyes and ears, you know, very sharp, because we can't afford to lose the grid. We just cannot. Even if there's a super weather event, we can tolerate it being down, but coming back up is really, really important. You know, how many of you remember Katrina about 10 years ago? I mean, that was a devastating storm. But since then, we've had quite a number of storms. I don't want to attribute this to climate change, something like that. This could be a statistical kind of freak. But we have to be prepared for this, and we have to kind of meet that. So the importance of the electric grid, tied with the innovation that is taking place, and tied with the difficulty. Now, what do I mean by that? And I'll get into some of the details. You know, the old way of generating electricity and distributing electricity was all one-way traffic. And you can imagine that, you know, say the Pennsylvania Turnpike, you could only go west to east. You know? That's how it was. You know, electricity came from a source and it went to a consumer. And there was really one-way traffic. And now you have two-way, three-way, multiple-way traffic, each with their own characteristics. Some of them are not as regular, like big, large generators are very steady, you know, flow of electricity, whereas solar and wind, as you know, the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, you get this intermittency. To have this all on the grid, you know, it's a heck of a task, especially two-way flow of electricity, sometimes three-way, four-way. And the intermittency means you cannot manage the grid the good old-fashioned way, which was, by the way, every 15 minutes, the grid operator would actually figure out, oh, okay, I need to balance the load now. So he would kind of, you know, hit a couple of buttons and switches, and he's good for another 15 minutes. Now you need to make a decision maybe 1,000, 10,000, million times a second to keep this load balanced, because, you know, electricity, as you well know, you cannot store it. I mean, at least efficiently. There are no storage technologies, but you've got to maintain this balance at all times, which means what? Automation. You can't have a human being playing with switches 1,000, 10,000 times a second. You need machines that are reliable. And machines where there's also forensics that as human beings understand what the hell happened if something were to be screwed up. Okay? So it is the most difficult problem too. And that's where you guys come in, the young generation. You have all the ingredients for a career that could be innovative, it's difficult to solve, and it's the most important. So you're in the limelight all the time. And never in my career have I seen energy take such a position. It's so important. So here's a graph that is sometimes, it shows, the black line shows, okay, the GDP is the green line, I believe. And the black line is the growth of electricity. And so you can see there's a very close correlation between how prosperous US has been through the past century, to the growth of electricity. And there again, this strong correlation. The more electricity production is tied to economic GDP is the model that's being followed by developing countries. So guess what? The most rapidly developing countries today are China and India. And they're building power plants like there's no tomorrow. And sometimes they're challenged because there's some new climate issues. And they have to deal with, well, I can't burn coal anymore. And they're feeling the pinch. In places like Beijing and New Delhi, you have smog and fog that's nothing like you've ever seen. Once upon a time, you could think of Los Angeles as being one of the most worst cities to live in. And compared to these cities today, Los Angeles is really great. And I think we here in the United States have seen the kind of deleterious effect. And we can kind of go back and use up our fossil fuels. But you can see developing countries, they want a piece of the cake there. So you're seeing a great amount of progress, and that is tied with electricity production. And so it's a really vital part. Here's another statistic which is somewhat humbling. In 1920, the per capita consumption of electricity, of power that you needed, was 0.1 kilowatts or 100 watts. So think of one home consuming 100 watts. I mean, all it needed was a 100-watt bulb, and that's all that you used around back in the 20s. And this decade is 3.3 kilowatts, 3,300-watt bulbs, or 60-watt bulbs, equivalents of that. So, we have become more electricity dependent. Everything that we use, most everything we do, requires electricity, reliable electricity, and resilient electricity. So I talked about this. The top generation is, China has overtaken the US, although they have more people. The per capita generation of electricity is by far the highest here in the United States. But there are some other factors too. Maybe there are real opportunities for us to be able to kind of conserve electricity or be more efficient in how we generate electricity. Those are that's again part of the difficult problems that US students would be solving. And it goes down the list of all the countries that are net generation. And so, by the way, those units that I've provided are in billions of kilowatt hours, kilowatt hours. You hear, a term called the quad. How many of you heard of that? Quad of energy is 1 quadrillion BTU units. So, you can kind of have your mind spinning trying to convert kilowatt hours to joules or quads, but be that as it may, those numbers tell you, how much is produced and how much is consumed in those 3 leading nations and 3 leading generators of electricity. Okay, how many of you have seen this chart, the spaghetti chart? It's not something you would read on a kind of a day that you'd rather do something else. But this is something which was invented by, I guess, a person called Sankey. And it shows the total inflow and outflow. It's a really nice way to understand, what is the flow of fuel to energy in a nation. This is for all of the United States. I think there's a number, about 100 quads of energy. I'm talking about electricity, I'm talking about petroleum, everything. And so what it shows is the conversion. So at the very top on the left-hand side, you have solar shown in yellow. 0.53 quads are generated annually. And so on down the line, nuclear is in red, hydro is in blue. So you can see the big blocks are natural gas, coal, and petroleum. And then electricity generation is, by the way, just a portion of that, 38 quads. That's the mustard box. Let me see. That's a mustard box there. And that goes through, it's fuels used for electricity generation include nuclear, solar, hydro, wind, geothermal, natural gas, and coal. So Pennsylvania is a very unique state. It's quite nuclear centric. We have 9 nuclear plants, only second to Illinois, which has more nuclear plants, and only secondary to France, which has 60% of its generation from nuclear energy. And, we've had an excellent record. We've had accidents in 3 Mile Island, we had Chernobyl, which was really negligence, and we had Fukushima, 2005, which was kind of 1 in a 500-year event. You couldn't help it. But then again, it was design basis. You could argue it wasn't well planned. And, and I, having had a long history in the energy business, I've been to many plants around the world, and the dedication of workers is just staggering. The regulation they have to follow, the production they have to, produce. And I did some training work in Fukushima in 2005. Did I say 2005 was the accident? Sorry, it was 2011. 2005, I did some training in Fukushima, and like any place I've been to Eastern European countries, in Russia, China, and India, and done training in different plants. The dedication of plant workers is just superb. They're very professional. And to, after six years hearing about this accident and seeing the devastation that nature can, wreak on something like this was just staggering. And I couldn't believe it. But nevertheless, the plant, there are 5 units, I believe, at Fukushima, they were all disabled. So, where I'm going with this is that the big, where's the light there? Okay, there we go. The big blocks that flow into electricity generation are natural gas, coal, and there's nuclear. There we go. There's nuclear. But in Pennsylvania, as I was saying, nuclear is a very large part. And what's the other large fuel that we are encountering these days in Pennsylvania? Anybody? Natural gas. You can't, this discovery of Marcellus Shale here, shale gas, it's just changed this completely. Believe me, in the last decade or decade and a half, we've seen natural gas prices and coal prices almost go flip over completely. Natural gas was something that would come from overseas, liquefied natural gas, really expensive. I think it was like 14 cents a unit to use. Now it's like 5 or 6 cents. And coal used to be 3 cents, and that's gone to 5 or 6 cents. Once upon a time, you used your natural gas to arbitrage. You would buy it with a low and use it, when the prices were high. So that arbitrage capability has pretty much disappeared. And because coal is kind of reeling, usage of coal, the climate issues around coal, the regulations, and by the way, they may all change in the next few years. But nevertheless, where we stand today, there are over 300 coal companies that have gone bankrupt. Coal has been replaced with natural gas. They're having natural gas pipelines that come close to the plant itself, in maybe a converted coal plant. And so here's, we're seeing a dynamic that's very interesting. And natural gas, by the way, is cleaner than coal, but it's not CO2 free. Remember that. When we talk about natural gas being clean alternative, yeah, a cleaner alternative, but not a clean alternative. So you have problems with natural gas too, but definitely it has been one of the boons that the U.S. is really taking advantage of. So here in Pennsylvania, we're sitting on top of two major generations that is utilized by the U.S. One is nuclear, and one is natural gas. And by the way, we're also very rich in coal. We've heard about clean coal technology. And unfortunately, it hasn't reached the level of economic vitality or economic parity, to make this a viable prospect. But it'll happen. And there are some projects going on, and that's why the innovation that we expect from you guys, would be terrific. We have clean coal that's economic. You kind of hit a jackpot. All right, this is called the Sankey chart. As you can see, I can put this together for different countries in the world, different states. Pennsylvania will have its own Sankey chart. And the reason I dwell on this in our course, in the generation course, I make this more experiential, where you have the students kind of generate the Sankey chart for Pennsylvania and for New York and do a side-by-side comparison. So this way they have on-the-ground feel for what the heck does it mean? I'm living in the state. And so nuclear is, second most, the largest generation in Pennsylvania, in all of the United States. So this is a nice way of comparing use of fuels. And here's an interesting leg that people are looking at where electricity generation can be used in transportation. You see this thin mustard line? So what are we talking about? Electric cars, electric vehicles. And, there was a lot of hue and cry maybe 5-6 years ago. Nissan Leaf, now of course Tesla. I guess that's all you hear these days. 100,000 a pop, not bad. Nissan Leaf is 40,000. When I worked at TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, and TVA is a very large utility. I was the vice president for technology. And we had two senators, and one of them, Lamar Alexander, who was a big backer of electric vehicles. And, he was influential enough. He had Nissan Leaf factory, the world headquarters for Nissan Leaf, right there in Smyrna, Tennessee, that's the district. And he drives the Nissan Leaf, I believe. The only senator, as far as I know, who drives an electric car. He's got a short commute. There are problems with electric cars. Range anxiety is one of them. But I think there are ways by which, if you were to look at human behavior, we are used to driving gasoline-fueled vehicles. It means I need fuel to drive all the way to Timbuktu if I have to, knowing that I'm just going to go grocery shopping. So the tank house needs to be full all the time. I can always turn the corner and see a Citgo or an Exxon, electric vehicles. We haven't reached that level of maturity. But you can see the impact it can have. In fact, a few years ago, there was this talk about when electric vehicles penetration in certain markets would exceed 30, 40, 50%. But what has happened, I think, in the early this decade, there were CAFE standards, I think the previous administration, that required very high mileage and more efficient gasoline-powered engines. And so, that set back fuel and gasoline prices, of course, went downwards and downwards. I don't know, $2+ a gallon is astoundingly low. I remember in graduate school in the 1970s when it popped up to $1.35, which in today's money is probably about $4 or so. It seemed high, but Yeah, today is very low. You know, of course, you're prospered along the way. So this is a nice way to examine, you know, where the fuels are going, how is electricity used, and by the way, your rates are all decided by this combination of residential, commercial, and industrial users. If transportation takes on a bigger role, you can see that this is going to start playing a role. In other words, you start charge, if say large penetration of electric vehicles, then the way you charge your car, nighttime or daytime, and the prices being what they are night and day, you know, there's a behavioral changes that could take place. All right, I don't have to remind you, I've gone through this many times, that yesterday's power system was left to right, generated to the left, went to the consumer at right, and by the way, many plants don't have developments very close to them for so many reasons. Some of them is just psychological. Not in my backyard, NIMBY. Something's going to happen. But nevertheless, it left to right, and so all the consumers were either well to the right or way to the right. So you had to build transmission lines. So each time you had a new load or new development, and that if the transmission line could cater to that, then you had to build new transmission lines. I'm sorry. So tomorrow's power system is going to be, and in fact, I shouldn't say tomorrow's, I should say today's and tomorrow's. Today it's already there. Is going to be a lot more complicated, not just by how this figure depicts it, you know, but how you manage it. You see this grid, you know, I mean, some people have written so poetically about how do you manage the grid? You know, it's like, you know, the PJM grid. How many of you heard of this? The PJM grid is the largest grid in the world. You know, they've said like there are 1 billion plus devices off the grid. And every one of those devices need to be synchronized. You can't afford them not to be in step. So just managing this grid, you know, and if you had, you know, frequency, if it starts, if the demand exceeds supply or supply exceeds demand, you know, the frequency of electricity goes one way or the other. And usually in countries that are less developed, supply is falling behind demand. So they have either rolling blackouts or regular blackouts. And you know, one interesting thing in the applicants who come to our course here, you know, they come from various backgrounds. And I saw this letter of intent from a lady from Nigeria as a kid, and she's now graduating from Columbia with bachelor's. Her letter said, right to when she was young, she would, you know, get together with her relatives, and there was blackouts for hours and hours together. So it was kind of drilled into her psyche that this is part of her life, you know, blackout grid. And so she's taking up energy because she wants to address this problem, because having felt it. So you can see the psychological impact it can have, you know, in a country where, you know, they're still struggling to advance. But the grid needs to be balanced, and it doesn't get balanced. It needs technology, and you need expert people to be able to doing this. You need strong regulations. You know, if you have a generator that's operating very unreliably, like for example solar plants, because you know if the intermittency could go up and down, you need to have controls that manage it so that the grid is not stressed. And so the grid operator, which once upon a time was a human being, is not a bank of computers, but definitely automation devices that are very sophisticated. Great future for folks who want to get into that field. This doesn't work. So it's not a question of will there be change, is the pace of change. And the pace of change is, you can see that some states, I know I was in the Southeast, they don't have a mandate to have renewable energy, although North Carolina, where I was, it had one of the strongest mandates. It had to have, I think, 12.5% renewable energy in their portfolio. California is one of the most aggressive, 30%. Washington State, Oregon, they're all quite strong. You should follow the developments in New York. I think they're aspiring to 50%. And they've come up with a business model called the REV, New York REV. How many of you heard that? Okay. It is not only the most exciting, but people are fearful. Will this actually work? So that's part of innovation, is that sometimes you need to take starter steps before you can really walk and then run. But the New York REV is one of the most exciting changes that we are about to see. And they've got a number of demonstration projects. And by the way, in our course, we kind of, one of the assignments was last year to look at one of the demonstration projects that New York REV is undertaking and give a kind of a view of what they thought. Okay. So interoperability, how many of you heard the phrase smart grid? Nearly all of you, right? And how many of you know, what's a succinct definition, you think? Yes, so let's hear it from you.
Let me turn your power off. Okay? Basically, that's the bottom line of it. Okay? There you go. And rather than generation control, load control, load management.
Very good point. Any other takers?
Communication and automation to better control the electric system.
Right. Nice, techy answer. That's what I expected. But his was right. It was, you're absolutely correct in your answer, sir. But this is communications and automation. How do you communicate? One of the Brazilians, people wanted to know, why did my electricity go off? And B, when's it going to come back on? I was in Tennessee, TVA, and we had one of the worst tornadoes in April 2011 pass through. And, TVA is a federal power. We did all the generation and transmission, but not the distribution. It was we had 155 distributors, 7 different states. And state was then in such a, it was the main highway, transmission line, going up to Huntsville, Alabama, which is a very important town in Alabama because you have the space center there, plus a lot of industries. And by the way, they have the highest PhDs per capita. Did you know that? I knew it after the event. Our CEO, Tom Kilgore, was livid. He had no idea what was up, what was down. He would get calls from irate customers saying, when the heck are you going to come back home? And he himself didn't know the answer. So he piled on us, when's it going to come back on? You see, the smart grid enables answers like this. You're able to look at, well, here's my problem. They can do a quick look at it. Maybe you get an on-field report nowadays. You can have, roving teams that actually get an assessment of the damage and send it up through satellites and give you an instant portrayal of, what is really down? Is there a distribution line that was felled by a tree? So the communication is a big part of load management. All very correct answers. So the smart grid is really the old grid overlaid with communication lines, and it could be so many different forms, but a quick way of communicating. So the challenges to utilities. I guess this is something that having worked in this business, I've seen where, utility stocks were things that one would buy because it was so reliable. You get dividends 5–10% because there was always electricity growth. That was in the 50s, 60s. But you can see from the line that the wiggles there, that the growth tapered from 12% in the 40s and 50s to 0%, sometimes 1%. And so if a company that was making 10, 12% and now making 1%, they're lucky 2%, and being, being also to take care of more environmental regulation, you see something's not going to work. There'll be layoffs. I think automation and computerization has added a lot. Reduced the cost of operations quite a bit. Computers, instead of having a turbine expert in every coal plant or every nuclear plant, now you can have virtual experts anywhere and cut down the number of people. This has a big impact on people's morale and everything else. That's a different story. When you have people who are dedicated and you have changes like this, this is sometimes wrenching, especially if it hits cold hard. And these are things, I don't want to theorize like this whole thing about the earth is flat and everything's going to work great. Maybe there's a mantra taken too far without looking at what do you do with people who are not trained. That may have been, it kind of had an impact, in the last election cycle. But it's a real problem. It's a problem that we have to face in the utility business one way or the other. So growth rate is really tapered down to zero. They need to look at new ways of cutting costs or making more money, what they call beneficial use of electricity. So what can you think of? It could be something other than you and I paying electric bills for our home. Something you can think of? Electric cars, right? If electric cars proliferate, there's more chances of electricity sales going up. If 50% of the automobile fleet in the United States was operated, with electric batteries, electric charging, wow, that's a big jump in use of electricity. But nevertheless, beneficial uses of electricity is one of the areas that utilities look for. But there again, there may be other players who may jump in. Googles and Apples, they have very deep pockets. You can see they're not going to let this alone. They want to jump in and change the business. So, folks, what I'm trying to say is the utility as it was, is the business model is probably going to change. We've seen changes in our territory. PPL, used to be what they call a fully vertical industry. They generated the energy, they transmitted it, they distributed it. And then they deregulated, separated the generation and formed Talen Energy. And they do wires only now, distribution and transmission. Well, Talen Energy was now sold out to a private equity firm. This happened about a few months ago. So the dynamics of who's playing in this market is also changing. So those are the exciting times. It's not what it was as before. So here's the case I'm making for why the ESEI program is kind of tailored towards graduating folks who are experts in the industry. Our mission, and you'll see that later, is to develop world-class technical leaders in energy. And the other statistic, and I shared this with some people before, is that the vertical axis is a percentage of things. And this is through the years. And what the curve shows is percentage of recent college graduates who take on jobs that don't require a college degree. Okay? Take on jobs that don't require a college degree. That number is 42%. It hovered starting at 1990. It hasn't changed much. It's got those cycles, but they're probably due to recessionary, like in 2002 and then in the 2008, 2009 recession. And what about college graduates who had graduated, not recent graduates? That too, they're looking at jobs that are, they're underemployed, as it were. Taking on jobs that don't require a college degree. So, so here you are, finish 4 years of college. Your parents have spent a whole bunch of money on you, and you take on a 5th year through the ESEI program. As you know, it's Lehigh. and how that sits. Systems are also very expensive these days. So what is the value proposition? The value proposition that I remember when I was working, taking on a student, I was, like I was staff of about 50. So having students or hiring students was an investment. I saw this person, he or she, as being trained as, say, a piping engineer, and he or she would advance, maybe get into a manager position, management, training needs to go along with it. But people can move in different ways. So if that person were to move out in 3 or 4 years, in the industry, they're stuck with a lost investment. I mean, it just happens, of course. I take on a job to go, and I could leave anytime I wanted. So they are wanting people who can hit the ground running. What does it mean? It means that they don't want to have to babysit you. You know enough about the business, and that's what we try to impart. And what does that involve? Not only knowing how this works, but conveying to people, communication, somebody brought that up. How does it work? Explain to your neighbors, what is nuclear power? They're only scared about nuclear power. And they rely on Wendy, help me out. And you say, oh yeah, don't go near a nuclear plant. You just, there we go, one customer at time. So the way to communicate this is also something we stress, in this 10-month course. It is to what we call a kind of a technical presentation, like me standing to you guys, or a guy, say a recent graduate, working in an industry and then stuck with the CEO in this elevator, and he wants to get the elevator somewhere. How do you hit the strong points of what you know? We're not going through messy equations. What is it that you want to tell me? That's such a great idea. So communication. I call myself a reformed engineer. I have an engineering background. I love that. But I noticed that if you don't communicate, you've lost the battle. You may have the best equations, the best material, but if I can't convince this kid here, I lost it. And it's an opportunity lost. And that's what we want, in this course, to be able, have you able to convey this message very strongly, eloquently. So here's the gap that we have, and that's what ESEI, they should be, the whole point is that you are prepared to hit the ground running as we go forward. So also want to let you know that, ESEI, it doesn't work in a vacuum within Lehigh. It has some very strong components. We have the Rosen College of Engineering. We rely on faculty to kind of provide some firepower to some of our elective subjects, like PV technology maybe, or maybe marine hydrokinetics. Because we can't afford to hire an expert there, we can only hire experts in the basic fundamental parts of generation, transmission, distribution, energy and environment, and running projects. We are the Strategic Advisory Committee made up of industrial advisors. And that's another thing that distinguishes our program from most programs. You are surrounded by mentors, advisors, like Alan. Alan Ross is one of our advisors. Alan? Yeah, so, sorry, signal here. He's one of our advisors. And the whole idea is students can look upon people like Alan, for expertise, experience, and also mentorship. And most importantly, if the student or if the advisor is impressed enough, they can hire the student. And this has happened to a few of our graduates. They'll hire them, quote, on the spot here. So we have an advisory committee. We have the environmental initiative. This is a big part of our efforts here. The I&E cluster, which is very heavily involved in cybersecurity, as I mentioned before, is a huge problem that the grid has to contend with. The Energy Research Center, how many of you have heard of that? Okay. Anybody from the Energy Research Center here? Okay. So it's in the mountaintop side, and They do a lot of advanced work, especially in fossil-related technologies. We have an academic oversight committee which looks at what we do. So, there are kind of guidance and make sure that we are on the straight and narrow rather than veering off track. This is our mission, produce a new generation of world-class leaders to solve issues in the energy industries. And the first sentence is indeed the mission. The rest of it is explaining what are those issues. The issues are assuring cleaner generation. Definitely we're more conscious of the harm we're doing to the environment, especially the younger generation. And as the older generation, I think we have an obligation to make sure we leave this place as clean as it was, if not cleaner than we came in. More customer choice. This is a big thing. Utilities and other industries too would treat customers like, there's a phrase utilities use, we're called ratepayers. You are called ratepayers. We're called ratepayers. Now, if you're customers, that means you have choices. You can say, no, I want this kind of generation, or no, I want that. Or I want, rates, where I can look at different kinds of rates. And sometimes you have this welter of choices, not knowing exactly which way to go. And more reliable infrastructure. We've had a very reliable infrastructure, but it is aging, but that's not the real issue. It is being asked to do things in ways it was never asked before. Two-way traffic, rapid switching, frankly, there's more energy being used, and less money being spent on transmission lines, and there's a question of economics: who shoulders the cost, and so on. While assuring economic prosperity, I've heard arguments: why can't we be so highly solar like Germany? They're way up in the tundras. Well, because they can afford high, or at least by mandate, their tariffs are very high. They pay 30, 40 cents a kilowatt hour. Can you imagine you and I in the US, we would militate like heck. We're used to paying like 10, 12 cents at most. California, yes, it's expensive. Hawaii too. But they can, in Germany, you can afford this because, afford a lot of solars because, it's critical to our economic prosperity that it remain low. So this is our vision, 3 legs of the stool: service, education, and research. And the seminar series this is a kickoff, and you can see that we have weekly seminars. And the news here is that at least 3 of the talks before the spring break involves former students of ESER. And you can see some of the topics: pathways to sustainable, resilient, reliable electric grids. He's there, right? Yeah, Kwame there. Financing renewable energy projects. Mika, he's going to be doing this through webinar, I believe. Going solar. Sarah is from New York, and she has large responsibility with this company, Safari Energy. So, personally, it's very gratifying to see former students come back, and they hold themselves really well. They're very confident speakers. So you're in for a treat. The network of today, was conventional players in energy. And right now, we're sitting on, as I mentioned, a number of folks who are somewhat new. Ernst & Young, I remember they're a big auditing firm for utility companies, and now they're in the cybersecurity solution space. BlackRock, who else? McKinsey's a big player. Deloitte. And of course the vendors, the vendors would be Siemens and General Electric. I don't have a picture there. But the whole energy network is not the usual set of players. There are a whole bunch of different players, and I should say most of them are very smart. They're ready to look at new ways of looking at this whole sphere to see how we can maintain the resilience and reliability. Okay, I'm going to stop here in the interest of time and also have you guys poke holes. So this is the end of my talk. I'm sorry it took some time. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. So, yes, sir.
You mentioned Governor Cuomo's vision for New York, Rev, and I think actually his goal is to have 100% renewable for New York State by 2050. 100% by 2050, which is quite distant.
Yeah.
I mean, looking at that goal, I mean, it's given technology now and probably 34 years from now, it doesn't seem to be feasible because of the lack of storage at the scale you would need to have 100% renewable. Storage is the limiting factor. You need a battery size. How do you see storage developing over, say, the next 20 years? You know, will there be any breakthroughs in storage, or we need to get beyond lithium ion, of course? How do we get to the storage that enables greater penetration of renewables in the system?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Because sometimes facts are facts. The energy density of lithium ion is what makes it so attractive. Petroleum energy density even more. That's why it is so attractive. Same with coal. There's a reason why the energy density is greater than coal. I think, it's one of those things where storage itself changed the dimensions and, the landscape. It is reaching good parity levels along with solar. I think I'm really excited about those solar technologies that plug and play. Because each panel has its own inverter, smart inverter, its own storage. So it's built in. So I can see economics driving in that direction. It may not be 6 or 10 cents per kilowatt hour, maybe 12 cents. I think eventually prices will need to go up because as customer choices, as you well know, if you exercise customer choices here, you have this plan and that plan, ultimately, whoever the provider or distributor is, they're going to be profitable. I mean, that's natural. But I want I think technology has its very two ways to play. In fact, Dr. Sasky, she's her battery company, by the way, was all in her head. It was acquired by Dyson because she looked at this batteries on a bottoms up approach. What do I need to solve the energy density problem? What do I need to do the depth of charge issue? So she looked at it in a very methodical way. And I think she's done pretty well. She's done some TED talks. I don't want to cut short battery technology. I think there could be some huge surprises. But you're right, it is one of those holy grails which alter this energy. Yes. Anything else?
I'm going to take this issue a little further. FERC issued regulations a few years back that said that renewable energy must be able to produce bars as well as bars and other contribute to stability of the grid, as well as regulations. They also said that it must also be capable of riding through voltage disturbances as well as frequency disturbance. I told you that we write 1547 and 1547.1 to make these allowances available. They're now rewriting all of the 1546 and go even further than that. Taking this gentleman's comments about communication control. Right now, the minimum you need for communication between renewables is the renewable has to tell its data collection, whoever that is, that it's on the line as it is, that it's producing energy for it is, that it's responding to what it's been told to do for it is. And then you go beyond that with additional information that you don't expect that. But the bottom line is that they are also going to, they being FERC and NERC are going also to require that any renewable energy system that's connected to the grid must provide a minimum of 1 hour ride through for energy supply to the grid in the case of fall off of the sun from your solar panel or reductions in wind for wind energy and whatever else you get for your energy source.
Excellent point. And I'll say two things. I think part of this plug and play, many of these systems have a way of predicting what the plant output, solar plant output would be, because they're always monitoring and diagnosing what the instantaneous output would be. So giving an early heads up, is one of those areas where it's much more sophisticated how they manage the plant. And it may be rewarded in the capacity market because now they can give you a very good feel for what capacity can I really produce. The second is, I think solar developers generally went there with rose-colored glasses, knowing the challenges of island. But we talk a lot about microgridding, and then how do you island? And how do you manage this load all by yourself in the microgrid environment? It's something that I frankly think they haven't even thought about this. So the biggest problem that I go to remind you, the interconnection of renewables to the grid is something as basic as putting them all together, not all this the smart panel and all this good stuff. That is the most irritating problem. Yeah.
Trying to put in a cheap plug for a future talk. March 8th and 9th is going to be a speaker here from General Electric. He's going to be talking here on March 9th, about 4:15 or so in this room. And the topic will be the integration of distributed use on the distribution. And the same talk, or a similar one, will be given March 8th over at the announcement will hopefully be out in the next safety date. That detailed announcement is signed up in a couple of weeks. But just wanted to put that plug in.
That's wonderful. So stay tuned, guys. And any questions from students here?
I have a question. What's the 1 hour ride for them? I'm not really clear on this. That's enough energy storage so that you can ride through for the power without the renewable energy source on your generator.
So if the sun would fail, it would be off or not drawing, or would it have to supply the energy in the sun?
It has to supply the energy that your renewable heat source is rated in capacity. Okay, so if you have a 1 kilowatt solar panel, you need 1 kilowatt hour of energy storage.
If you continue to do that, then what do you do? Then you send the signal out. The sun's off. I'm going down in an hour. No, you're not.
No,
It's not that you're going to provide energy to the grid for that hour. It's that you're going to have sufficient energy on site so that as your sun varies up and down, you can maintain a constant flow of energy to the grid. So if you have contracted with your local ISO that I'm going to give you 10 kilowatts of energy tomorrow, and the sun starts to vary or clouds start to come in, you continue to provide that 10 kilowatts. If you look at the Energy Information Agency's allocation of capacity to the various generation sources, solar right now is allocated 25% of the grid capacity, so about 100 kilowatt solar panel. Your ISO is going to credit you for 25 kilowatts.
So it's just 40.
Oh yeah, well, it definitely is.
So I'm glad you believe that, because part of my midterm exam was to design an all solar 100-home community which would have 24 hours. Some of them are idealized. 24-hour supply of solar, so they have to be over designed so they could store it. But also in those times when they were storm event or it rained 5 days in a row, they'd have to rely on the grid and they would have to pay a premium. They had to work out what would be the cost of electricity. And then Larry, you were the student who went through that exercise, and so you can talk to him about what the experience was. But ultimately, the story was that the cost of solar is not on par with what you pay for conventional electricity. We've got still some ways to go. It was actually a problem that was defined for this area. So you had the insulation. One question from the students before we leave. I'm not going to let you go. Anybody? Background. All right. So, what's the big takeaway? Best time to be in energy. The most innovative, it's the most difficult, and it's the most important. So, thank you again for your attention.
Well, can I ask you a question? Are you designing the curriculum to really deal with the energy sources that are becoming predominant now? You know, basically coal-fired energy is dead. So you probably, the existing units are there, they'll maintain themselves for a while, but no one's building. So you have gas combined cycle, gas simple cycle, nuclear, except for a few units in the south. That industry's dead too.
Well, I told you Pennsylvania is second largest.
No, but I mean, you have units retiring unless they're
I agree.
getting things like specs in New York and in Illinois, subsidies to keep them operating. They're uneconomical. So it's gas-fired combined cycle, simple cycles, renewable energy are the things that are going forward. Is your curriculum really designed for that future, or are you still dealing with some of the technologies that are going to basically exit the scene over the next couple of decades?
Talk about the psyche chart and looking at integrated planning. What does it look like? With energy or something else, and look at how it changes over the 2-year time horizon. Generally, you're going to see nuclear and gas and coal occupy 30%, which is the next best. It'd be interesting to see beyond that. We have these demonstration projects which would shed a lot of light on how does it actually work on the ground. And if it shows success, I think it's a very interesting feature. Somewhere along the line, I think Richard brings question right through the high capacity type dimensional solar from 5%. These numbers are going to go up. They're going to creep up, they're not jump up. Because you're not going to have sun all the time. You only have radar anyway. So it's a question of our curriculum looks at these changes and how these affect in a general way. And you don't talk about universe or landscape, and just renewables and gas fires. You look at examples like general, you're high amount of renewables. Frankly, they're having problems. And then there's Norway. Norway is a very clever country. They call it blue-eyed chicks, because they have so much oil. And, they spend like hell. They live a very, very prosperous life. But they didn't learn to wind generate and all that because the idle wind turbines in Sweden and Denmark, they had to dump the wind energy, so they take it. So there's some things that, the apple cart gets inverted. We as a society, we as administration, if we stand something like this, there could be upheavals that it won't be very pleasant. I think that maybe Deerfield is very calm about these things. But there will be upheavals. We don't really get into what the landscape would be, but look at what could happen. And let your mind work. There could be some very innovative solutions that we look for. Business models is another area I stress about what can be done. That could be another interesting way of looking at what the business model do to improve. Right, so.
And I'll add to that, part of our curriculum includes a project.
Oh, yeah.
And in that space, students kind of have some, I'll let you address that.
Yeah, we have industry advised projects or industry-based projects. For example, this past semester, we had ones looking at how we use energy within certain parts of the school. This is really one of the more efficient ones. But there's still opportunities save energy. So if you could show that save is like wrong schedule, that's not rocket science. But looking at how the altered human behavior to be able to meet your objective is rocket science for human resilience. And so that could be a transit one. Then we work with a startup company looking at hydropower energy, very exciting. The local Pennsylvania company. It's renewable, but guess what? Unlike solar and wind, where the sun never shines and they're not both, I think that's pretty damn safe. All right? And so, to me, that was kind of a revelation too. So, for the night or day, it all depends on mood, conditions, like that. They want to look at kind of statistical models for certain resource areas where this could be models. So you could, instead of getting accurate measurements, you could say, here's the area of Massachusetts, this is the kind of energy that it appears. And for those of you who are not familiar, the faster the thermal spins, it's related to the cube of the velocity, the amount of energy. So it doesn't take much to spin faster than 4 times per flow to generate a lot of energy. How do you balance the design of your turbine? If you're working with a place out of there, tomorrow I'll be visiting the Nuclear Energy Institute, looking at, they are very gung-ho on nuclear, as you all know. They have the nuclear promise, and there are a lot of policy issues, very state by state. Of course, no federal policy. And their job is to look at, what can we do to influence policy. So we're hoping that we can develop a solution. But interesting thing that's it.
I'm going to preface my comment with data is incredibly to the best advantage of the company. Okay, so it's coming from my point of view. First, Michael, they've been around for decades. They call them the power system. They can load advantage, they can synchronize and parallel and multiple sets and address a chance. Some of that can be looked at with respect to what they're talking about with market today. In fact, when you look at IA85's forecast of cost of generation, nuclear is significantly less in solar than wind, significantly less. So the cost on the place per megawatt hour is there. However, it's going to take consumption and you would get leaks in nuclear power generation. The one that I'm keenly interested in seeing is double headed reactors, because they can be small in size and distributed. Where they'll go with the demand. Much like people turbines. We don't need that. Exactly. They don't have to be in a river or a lake.
Well, that's some ours, they got browsed to be able to just doing the first COL for BMW design. I think after that, they dropped it because whatever reason, like funding dried up. It's very new scale that's come up. It's bolster 45 megawatts, 10 of that. There's a very interesting design to passive safe, secure, you kind of dig in a hole in the mountain or someplace like that. Okay, anything?
Just to note, for those of you who were looking for professional development hours for this session, if you note on your sign-up sheet, just print PDA, by your name, Wendy will email you.
I will have a certificate to you within the hour via email.
Well, again, thank you all for coming, and see you next week.
Thank you. This is kind of an overview of what we do, and each week is going to be a different facilitator who's going to be addressing a different topic. So definitely welcome back every Tuesday at 1.
Oh, thank you for coming, sir.
Yes,
Thank you, sir.
I'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week.
It's a very challenging subject.
Yeah, so I'm glad you meeting a professor emeritus. Really good. Thank you. Hey, how you doing?
Real good. I'm David.
David? What's your last name?
Ellis.
Ellis, okay?
Just to tell a good story, it probably helps to have some conflict in it someplace. Too bad we never have conflict in policy between the ISO level and the state level. Too bad we never have conflict with generation resources not being ready to spin when it gets ultra cold, as it did 3 years ago.
Right.
There must be some good stories that could come out of that someplace.
Yeah, I'm sure. But you know, I think this is where, David, you're a PSENG, so we welcome you participating. You know, to make a talk like this, we want outsiders to talk. You know, my role is just to kick it off and kind of lay the groundwork for future talks. And
Thank you,
thank you
sir.
again. Yeah, thanks for coming down.
My alma mater has a very close relationship with PSENG.
Oh,
NCE.
I'm sorry, which school?
Okay. New Jersey Institute of Technology.
Oh, NJIT, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm with you now.
I graduated with Newark College of Engineering.
Aha.
That's a number of years ago.
So a good friend of mine, Jim Shank, is I think he's still at PSE. I think now he's a IT guy now. He's doing instrumentation and control.
Oh, okay. The name doesn't
He was
register.
the nuclear side, and then I think he's gone the IT side now.
Okay,
He's probably pretty high up, or a group manager or something.
okay. Well, we're having some fun with solar projects and microgrid projects with renewables that I'm not in the middle of, but I get to watch from the sidelines.
Yeah, you know, definitely. You know, if I can make a shameless plug, you know, there's a projects that we can involve our students. You know, they're actually you don't have to pay them anything as long as it's a project that we can okay for credit. You know, these guys work like ants, man, you know, on the project. So 16 weeks, I mean, the project's for 6 credits or 3, but I'm going to make it compulsory that when we engage an outside industry customer that we get a little more longevity, so 6 credits, 2 semesters. So that's something that I've been looking for. You know, there's Jerry Lynn. Jerry Lynn? Oh, he was PJM, sorry.
Okay.
There was a guy called Whitman that I know from a long time ago.
Okay.
He came to our advisory meeting. So
Okay.
I don't know if you heard that name.
That name's not ringing a bell for me either, but I've been there about a dozen years. So.
Where were you before?
Worked with General Electric for a couple of years.
Oh, at Schenectady or?
No, Pittsfield, Hickory, North Carolina, Somersworth, New Hampshire.
Where you spend most of your time there, GE?
About 20 years at GE,
Okay.
and a little bit of time in the PJM region doing sales work as well.
Good. Well, you're obviously a very strong background. So, you know, if you, Dave, if you wanted to volunteer to make a presentation here, like our seminar series, I'd love it.
You know, I'm not sure I'd be any good, but my strength is metering and some of the,
please don't underestimate. I think the knowledge you learn at a GE and a power plant is just staggering. I mean, I just squirreled away every time I went to a plant. I just was so, I mean, I was very sincere when I said that, how dedicated they are. Yeah, I worked in the boiler chemistry and non-destructive evaluation side. I mean, the professionalism that's there all around the world. I mean, this is a global thing. It's just crazy good.
and I'm not sure how real it is, but it seems like one more area of conflict to me is that PJM is balancing load. And in a few cases, they're dispatching resources to balance frequency or keep frequency close to 60. But PJM isn't necessarily concerned about voltage as the voltage gets to the consumer.
Oh, okay.
That's somebody else's problem.
It's just the distributor.
So the
Something to keep it up there, food chain,